So welcome to you all. Clearly my most important affiliation this weekend is as an alumna. But I also want to tell you a little bit about the Urban Education Institute, very briefly, just as a framing for the presentation we're going to hear today, which focuses on the Committee on Education. So the Urban Education Institute was opened in 2008, but it's an interesting institute in that it encapsulates and includes organizations that pre-existed by decades. We think about the Urban Education Institute as consisting of three foundational cornerstones. The first is an applied research organization called the Consortium on Chicago School Research. How many of you have heard of the consortium? Many of you. The consortium opened in 1990, immediately following the release of the 1988 Chicago School Reform Act. The Chicago School Reform Act was a monumental piece of legislation in the state of Illinois, and specifically in Chicago, that created a very interesting experiment in terms of school reform in the United States. The consortium was formed to study, in a place-based way, school reform in Chicago. One of the very interesting things about the consortium, while it is place-based, is that it's being replicated in other places throughout the country. We currently have 5 what we call baby consortia, and from what I understand, 2 of them have been promoted to toddler now. And they are modeled after the way that the consortium does their research and work. The purpose of the consortium's work, then, is to provide high-quality research on initiatives and policies within Chicago Public Schools for Chicago Public School leadership and also for the general public. The second organization that makes up the Urban Education Institute is the Urban Teacher Education Program, or Chicago UTEP. Chicago UTEP is a teacher preparation program that began at the university in 2003. It is distinctive in its approach to preparing urban teachers in several ways. The first way in which it's distinctive is it's a 2-year program. And this is in contrast to programs that generally last a year or less than a year in certifying teachers. What do we do with all that extra time? What is distinctively urban about urban teacher preparation in Chicago UTEP? What we do with our teachers, our aspiring teachers, is we actually give them a full year of clinical preparation in schools. What that means is that our aspiring teachers actually have placements in 4 classrooms as student teachers over the course of a summer, an academic year, and another summer. This is in comparison to traditional teacher certification in classroom placements that last more along several weeks or a semester at best. So it's distinctive in the way that we believe that intensive in-classroom preparation is necessary to prepare urban teachers to persist in the profession and to be successful and in leadership positions. The second distinctive feature of Chicago UTEP is the coaching component. We actually have started to conceptualize UTEP as a 5-year program with the 2 years of in-classroom preparation at the university and in-classroom preparation in schools, followed by 3 years as new teachers in which we provide in-classroom coaching and support to those teachers. Again, this is very distinctive in that most teacher preparation programs do not provide in-classroom support or professional development that continues out into the profession. We've found this to be very successful ways so far to prepare urban teachers. And just to give you an idea of how successful it's been, so far 95% of our graduates over the last 3 years are still in teaching in urban areas, most of them in Chicago. And this is in comparison to a profession in which it's very common to see a 50% turnover rate in teachers in the first 3 years. And in high-need urban areas that serve high poverty populations, that turnover rate can be more like 80%. So we're seeing some really good results from Chicago UTEP as well. The other piece of the Urban Education Institute is the University of Chicago Charter School with its 4 campuses. These schools were started between 1998 and 2006. We have 2 elementary schools, a middle school, and a combined middle school, high school in our portfolio of charter schools. And we actually have Steve Raudenbush is working on establishing, studying, providing descriptive and analytical information about the Chicago model of schooling, about what it is that we're doing in these schools that's distinctively Chicago and distinctively preparing urban students for readiness and success and graduation in college. So far, what we've seen has been very encouraging in terms of the results that our students have. The book that Steve is writing will provide even more documentation and evidence on the success of this model and also the challenges inherent with it. But this year, for instance, we have a 93% college acceptance rate from our first class of graduating seniors. This is in, again, high poverty area. Most of the graduates from our high school are high poverty African American students. And so this is a very high success rate with our students. We also, in looking across all of our graduates from across all 4 of the charter schools and all the students that have come through since 1998, we have a 90% high school completion rate, which again, this is in comparison to a system that is a little over has a little over half of its students graduating. So we're very encouraged by the results that we've seen in the Urban Education Institute. And then finally, we have the Committee on Education, which Susan Levine and Steve Raudenbush will be talking about today. That is what we're going to be spending the majority of this session focused on. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce the 2 speakers in this session who are truly distinguished faculty members at the University of Chicago and in the Committee on Education. Starting with Steve Raudenbush, he's the Louis Sebring Distinguished Service Professor in the Department of Sociology and the chair of the Committee on Education at the University of Chicago. He is a leading scholar on quantitative methods for studying child and youth development within social settings, such as classrooms, schools, and neighborhoods. And he's probably best known for his work on developing hierarchical linear models, which if you were a student here, you may have studied it if it was recently within the last 10 years. I know it was required learning at the consortium and remains to be the most important piece of software that we use in the way of thinking about our research. Raudenbush has also been the scientific director of the Project on Human Development in Chicago Neighborhoods, an ambitious study of how family, neighborhood, and school settings shape academic learning, social development, mental health, and exposure to violence for children growing up in Chicago. Currently, he's studying the impact of school mobility on student learning and developing new measures of school and classroom quality. And so, please welcome Steve Raudenbush. We also have with us another distinguished professor who has a long history at the University of Chicago, Susan Levine. Susan Levine came to us in 1972, is that correct?
No, 1976.
1976, and so has been a long-time member of the University of Chicago community. She joined the faculty then in 76. Professor Levine is co-director of the Center for Early Childhood Research and serves as the chair of the Psychology Department's program in Developmental Psychology. And in addition, she serves as the chair of the Department Curriculum Committee and serves on the board of Chapin Hall. Her research interests are very interesting, actually. I'm glad that we'll get the chance to hear the two of these scholars speaking together. She focuses on cognitive development and plasticity of spatial skills, early quantitative development, and in particular, language development in children with early brain injury as well. So please welcome Susan Levine. And with that overview, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers for this event.
Well, thanks very much, Sarah. It's tremendously exciting to be here at the University of Chicago, and welcome to you all this afternoon. I've been here for 5 years, and this is the most exciting work that I've ever been engaged in. So I want us to think for a moment about a very broad question, which is, how does a premier research university contribute to the quality of education? I mean, obviously, improving education, particularly for the most disadvantaged kids in our society, is one of the most important items on our national agenda. Everyone seems to agree about that. So how does a university like Chicago help? And Chicago is uniquely committed, as you know, among all universities, even among the most research intensive, to the creation of new knowledge and the sharing of knowledge. I mean, universities do a lot of things. Chicago pretty much focuses heavily on creating and sharing new knowledge. It's really what it's all about. And our sense is universities that focus on research are not going to primarily be training most of the practitioners. They're not going to be running most of the schools. We are not single-handedly going to go out and make schools great. And yet we're deeply involved in creating what we think are some of the best schools that we know of and that we can possibly create, and creating a teacher training program rooted in those schools that we think is exemplary. And I think the answer to the question is, our role is to create and share knowledge about this problem, about how to create outstanding schooling. So knowledge that other people can use, the vast numbers of people who will be creating the schools, who will be training the practitioners. So then the question is, how does if we agree, and I'd be interested in your thoughts at any time if you have any questions or comments. If that's the right question, what is our contribution? If the right answer is to create knowledge, then the question is, how does a university like Chicago organize itself to make that happen? And we've come up with something that we think is absolutely unique. We don't think there's any other university in the country that's organized in any way that closely resembles what we have. Now, that could be a bad thing, right? I mean, why are we so weird? But we think it's a good thing, and then we want to share this idea with you. So the Committee on Education is a crucial part of that. And the Urban Education Institute is the second crucial part of that. And the idea is that those two things need to be very strong, and they need to be closely connected with each other, always learning one from the other. So the Committee on Education is the place where scholarship and education is centered at the university. But it's not like a school of education. Rather, it's an interdisciplinary endeavor. All of the members of the Committee on Education have primary appointments in one of the departments or the schools, and all of the members of the Committee on Education are required to be distinguished contributors to education research. We often say you could be a Nobel laureate in astronomy, and if you woke up some morning thinking you would get involved in education research, you would not be eligible to be a member of the Committee on Education, because doing exemplary education research is one of the crucial issues. So we carry out interdisciplinary educational research, and as we do that, we collaborate very closely with people who are working in the consortium, learning about what's going on in schools in very practical ways. We work very closely with people who are running these wonderful new schools we have. And we think that the issues that arise and what we learn from practice is tremendously important in driving the agenda of the researchers on the Committee on Education. And we think that by constantly interacting with people who are running schools and training teachers, that the insights, the new insights coming from research, some of it very, very basic research, will be replenishing and informing and illuminating practice. Okay, so a little bit of detail about this committee. It's an interdisciplinary group of 15 faculty members. And as I mentioned, all of them have primary appointments in another department or school, and all are engaged in educational research. Our members are from the Department of Comparative Human Development, Economics, Mathematics, Psychology, Public Policy, Social Service Administration, and Sociology. This is a list of the members. I won't go through all of them. I'll mention that our newest member is Sion Baylock from the Department of Psychology, who's a tremendously talented young psychologist who is learning about how various aspects of stress affect the ability of people, everyone, to engage in cognitive tasks with a focus on children and a focus on stressors that arise in classroom settings. Susan Golden Meadow works very closely with Susan Levine on a seminal project on how children learn to speak and how language develops and what its implications are for later intellectual development, including reading comprehension, mathematics, and writing. And Susan's going to talk a little bit about that later. So that's just a little sampling. Paul Sally in mathematics is one of the founders of the University of Chicago School Mathematics Project. The curriculum that they've developed is the most widely used, we call it, of the reform curricula in the United States. I think something like 20% of the schools in the US actually use this curriculum. We're closely collaborating with the University of Chicago School Mathematics Project and the Urban Education Initiative to develop new ways of assessing children's cognitive development from ages 3 to 8. You're going to hear a little bit more about that in a few moments. Just a little sampling of what we do. There's so many other things. We have a pre-doctoral training program funded by the Institute for Education Sciences. This has been a tremendous boost to our recruitment of truly outstanding students. We've had this since 2005, and it brought $4.5 million to graduate student support, and I'm very proud to say that we have been renewed, and our new grant, which is almost $5 million, will support students until we're guaranteed until 2015. We have 18 pre-doctoral fellows, each with 5 years of funding, with stipends of $30,000 a year. Think about that when you compare to when you were a student and when I was a student trying to pay my own tuition. And with research support, with travel support, our new grant, we now have 10 fellows. We've been incredibly successful. We've been very good at competing with all of the best universities. We just recruited a new cohort, 6 out of 8 offers accepted. And we train quantitative social scientists in various disciplines to participate in education research. That's what the IAS Fellowship Program does. And our 2 big themes, we have a workshop that meets every week, and our 2 themes are children's cognitive development from ages 3 to 8, and we're also intensely interested in this transition to secondary school, and particularly looking at peers, neighborhoods, and motivational issues. Our fellows are very diverse. You can see across the divisions, across the departments within the Division of Social Science, and also the Harris School and School of Social Service, a grand total of 28 pre-doctoral fellows. So we have a really thriving program. I think in terms of graduate student training, we are thriving as well as education ever thrived in the history of the university. We have weekly education workshops. You are all invited when you're in town. Currently they meet Monday afternoon at 4. We have the best scholars from around the country and also locally, as well as our students, presenting the latest work, mostly related to the 2 themes I mentioned. We co-teach courses together, and we collaborate on a number of projects that I don't have time to explain to you, but they're quite fascinating. So the whole idea, and Sara really, I think, said this well, the whole idea here is to do this work well of scholarship and education. We think that fundamental issues in education preoccupy economists. I mean, human development, the development of skills, the development of skilled labor force are among the most fundamental questions in economics. How children develop cognitive skills and socio-emotional skills in school settings are among the most important issues in developmental psychology. How schools are organized and how the organization of school, particularly in urban settings, contributes to the life of communities and families is one of the most foundational questions in sociology. So it's not like we have to twist the arms of the best disciplinary researchers to be involved in education. These are core issues in the disciplines. The idea is to bring them together, but then, while doing this, to be in constant interaction with people who are working on the problems that Sara mentioned. And so we think that if you really want to learn, if you want to produce the kind of knowledge that we think we need to improve schooling, you have to try to create exemplary schools. And you have to learn everything you possibly can. You have to bring all the knowledge that you have to bear on that problem. And we're convinced that when you try to do that, you will confront virtually every theoretical and every public policy question in education. You can't avoid them in practice when you have to do that. It's a tremendously valuable discipline. And to see the results, and to see children who've been written off as hopeless because of having families and neighborhoods that are difficult, to see those children thrive and to go on to great colleges is a tremendous inspiration to every single member of the university and to our work. In those schools, we train the teachers that Sara was talking about. We develop tools for assessing and for teaching that we share with others, with others network of schools in Chicago and in fact with schools around the country. 71 schools around the country use our method of assessment and literacy instruction, which we are now working on extending down into the preschool grades. So we're going to talk a little bit, just to give you, so that's kind of the big picture. Those are our goals. This is how we've organized ourselves. This is the Committee on Education. This is how it relates to the Urban Education Institute. But just to give you a little deeper understanding of how this collaboration actually works, we want to talk about an example. We have a proposal now that's been solicited by several foundations to develop detailed assessments of the cognitive skills in reading and math that children need from the age of 3 to 8. What do they need to know and when do they need to know it? How do you know at every age whether children are on track to become terrific readers and writers by the age of 8? And what do you do if they're not quite on track to get them back on track? That's this project. And just to give you a sense of how deeply collaborative this is, we have a list of 6 co-investigators who are from the Committee on Education and the Urban Education Institute. We have a literacy team made up of 4 researchers and practitioners, including Nicole Ilieff, who's the director of our Donahue School, Molly Branson-Thayer, who's the chief literacy director for the Urban Education Institute, and others. We have a math team, which includes the members of the University of Chicago School Mathematics Project, and we have an outstanding expanding group of external advisors. So this project has engaged the enthusiasm and the collaboration of an amazing array of people at the university who bring unique skills on a seminal problem of early childhood development. And the reason the foundation solicited this grant proposal is because they think this will have truly national significance. So Susan Levine is going to tell us a little bit more about this example.
All right, well, Steve told you about this exciting new project where we're going to try to make an assessment system that the purpose of it isn't just to find out, how kids are doing, but really to link that assessment to children's learning and to let teachers figure out what are the kinds of instruction that children need in order to progress. So it's not just testing for the sake of figuring out a test score on a kid, but it's really formative assessment where we can use the results to guide instruction and learning. So in order to make this assessment for preschool children and link it to the assessments that are already in place for children in elementary school, we needed some essential ingredients. We couldn't just say we want to do this and start from scratch and be successful in a short time. But luckily, we have some things going on already on campus which allow us to take this important next step. And one of them Steve mentioned, that's our longitudinal language project, which both Steve and I and some other faculty, including Susan Golden Meadow and Jane Ellen Huttenlocker, are involved in. And what that project is we started by sampling children from the greater Chicago area at 14 months of age. And then this is a diverse sample that's representative of the demographics of Chicago. And we are visiting these people's homes every 4 months from the time they were 14 months. So at 14 months, 18 months, 22 months, etc. Now the children are in 2nd and 3rd grade, depending on when their birthday was. Anyway, what we do when we visit the homes is we ask the parent to interact with the child as they normally would, and we videotape these interactions. So you might think that, you know, if someone's coming into your home, you would, you know, kind of be on your best behavior, and maybe a little of that's going on, but that's pretty hard to sustain for a 90-minute period, you know, and they get used to us because we're coming every 4 months. And also, people have a certain way of talking, and it's very difficult to change that. So even if we're getting a little bit better behavior, you know, and a little more interaction than we, you know, you normally would see in the household if we weren't there, we think that the ordering of that, you know, across families is pretty representative of what goes on. So that's one study, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what we're learning from that study. Why it's important is that we know that by the time kids arrive at preschool, they have very different language skills. They're at very different levels, and that those levels are predictive of later school success. So it's very important for us to figure out what's going on early and what kinds of interactions between adults and children are most predictive of later school success. So the goal of that study is to examine in detail what's going on. And I know that in our country, a lot of people think that some kids are just better at learning language than others, and are better readers, and, you know, just have a lot of good language skill. They sort of essentialize those skills to be about the person. But what this project and other projects like it are showing is that it's not a level playing field, and I know that you all are aware of that, but the degree of the individual variation and what children get in terms of inputs that teach them language is unbelievable. So some kids, you know, in the 90-minute period are hearing you know, over 1,000 words, thousands of words, and others maybe hear 600 words. And the nature of those words differs too in terms of vocabulary diversity, the complexity of the syntax, whether the child has ever told a story. And those kinds of differences make a huge difference in terms of the language learning that the child does. So it's not just about, you know, whether the child is a good language learner, it's about, to a large extent, the variation in the input, the opportunities that they get to learn. The other ingredient that we have is something that's, the longitudinal language study, I should say, is funded by the National Institutes of Health. Then we have this NSF grant, which funds something called the Spatial Intelligence and Learning Center. It's a science of learning center. It's one of 6 in the country. It's a big effort to understand learning better, and our center focuses on spatial learning, which is a relatively ignored aspect of learning. And in fact, this is a prime example of, you know, we think that, you know, either we are a spatial person or we're not a spatial person. So, you know, you'll hear a lot of people say, you know, I don't read maps well, I'm not a spatial person. But it's actually also an ability that can be nurtured. And we have lots of evidence that you can become a spatial person. And this longitudinal language project actually interacts with the Spatial Intelligence and Learning Center in very interesting ways, because when we're in the home, we're not only able to observe the language that goes on, but the activities that go on. And some children have lots of opportunities to learn spatial thinking and spatial skills, and you'll see some examples of that. And then a third critical ingredient is we have from the Urban Education Institute a step assessment system that's in place for kindergarten through 6th graders that we can use as a basis for developing a similar assessment system and linking our new assessment system for preschoolers to the pre-existing one. And then in terms of the math aspect of our assessment, we're very fortunate to have the University of Chicago School Mathematics Project that Steve mentioned, and the Everyday Math Curriculum, which is the most widely used in the country. Okay, so challenge number 1 that we're thinking about as we develop our new assessment, which we hope will be funded, we have a lot of good vibes about that, is improving reading comprehension. This is critical because we've made relatively good progress in learning what kinds of instruction support reading decoding. There were reading wars a while ago where, you know, people were arguing about whether it was sight reading, the sight approach, or the more, you know, phonological approach where you teach kids that B makes the B sound, you know, that would work better. And people have really come down on, for most kids, the phonological approach works better. And we've made tremendous progress in helping kids crack the code and learn how to read. But learning, you know, to read a word doesn't mean that you're going to understand what you're reading. And that's where these oral language skills that I mentioned are really critical. And so we're looking at this program project data, the longitudinal language study, to give us a lot of information about what kinds of interactions with young children are both developmentally appropriate and support the understanding of language, which will later support reading comprehension. So we're looking at, you know, how complex is the language children hear? How much language do they hear? What are parents talking about? Are they giving them little narratives about the past and little stories about what's going to happen tomorrow? And when I say story, I mean things like a mom saying, you know, tomorrow we're going to go to the zoo. You know, it's not just about the here and now, like this is a bottle, you know, this is a computer. You know, those things are important too to get language off the ground, but we're finding that the use of decontextualized language with kids is also incredibly important in predicting their later language comprehension. So saying things, when I was a little girl, I liked to put puzzles together. Those kinds of utterances are really important and vary a lot across families. And then the other thing that we're looking at in detail is whether, you know, people make a lot of claims about early book reading, that book reading is really an important predictor of later reading comprehension, shared book reading, and we all think that that's the case. But we were interested in finding out whether it contributes over and above the language that kids hear. So we looked at that, and we also looked in detail at the nature of the book reading interactions. So I'm going to show you a couple of videos, I hope, of parents reading to children in very different ways. And then we can discuss those differences. So here's a mom who is, this child is 2.5 years old, and she is looking at a book with her daughter and reading the text. It's a very simple text. And then she asks a question, and the mom herself answers it before the kid has a chance to, which, you know, this kid's really little, and I actually think this is a pretty nice interaction, so let's take a look at it. Anyway, what this mom does is there's a picture of a baby, and she says the baby's crying. You know, why do you think the baby's crying? You know, maybe she's wet. You know, maybe she's hungry. Maybe she needs her diaper changed. So she's throwing out all these things.
Go ahead.
And the child is incredibly engaged in that interaction. Yeah. And then there's another video with a mom, the same age child, and I'll just bring up the picture anyway. So this was the first mom. And then this mom, you know, she's cuddling up with her daughter, and that's good. And the same age kid, 2.5 years old. And what she's doing is, this is a book, it's a Disney book actually, and she's just pointing to pictures and saying, this is a basket, this is a bottle, this is Pluto, this is, you know, the Disney character. And actually in the background here, which is another variable we're interested in, the TV is playing. The other family, it was quiet, it was just the book interaction. But anyway, what we're finding in our data is that it's the kind of reading the text and referencing and asking the child inference questions like, you know, why do you think the baby is crying? Or, you know, if it's a story about going to the zoo, do you remember when we went to the zoo? You know, to bring the child into the story, and not just this kind of pointing to pictures and labeling that predicts later reading comprehension when the children are in first grade. So that's really important, because we're learning that it's not just book reading that's important, it's certain kinds of book reading. And so that when we are developing our assessment system, if we're finding that kids are having trouble understanding oral narratives, we know what we can do to try to develop interventions. You know, this is the kind of interaction, both the narrative talk and the using the narrative around book reading in certain ways that can strengthen those skills. And then a second challenge is improving children's math achievement. And I've done a lot of research on the early inputs that are important for having strong math skills at the start of school. Now, most kids, when they start school, you know, can rattle off, you know, the number words, and parents are very proud of that. They'll say, you know, can you count for me? And my child can count to 20 or 100 or whatever, and just about every kid can do that by about 3 years of age. They can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But what most parents don't realize is that kids who can do that don't necessarily know what those words mean. So, you know, kids can also say A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And a lot of kids are saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, not realizing what this incredibly powerful counting system is any good for. So this is an experiment that shows that. A kid can count to 10, and, you know, parents are shocked when they see this, but, you know, we say to the kids, give me, you know, 3 ducks, and there might be a whole pile of ducks there, and they're grabbers. This is work that was first done by Karen Wynn. They'll pick up a pile of ducks and give it to you, or all of them. They don't know what 3 means. It takes them quite a while to figure out that 2 refers to sets of 2, 3 refers to sets of 3, 4 refers to sets of 4. It's about a year of development to get just those first few number words mapped. And once they get to around 4, they become what we call cardinal principle knowers, and they generalize it to the whole count list that they have. They sort of figure it out, that this system refers to sets. And one thing that we found to be very predictive of when kids figure that out is how much kids talk to their kids about number. So we used the same longitudinal language project, and we coded all the ways that parents talk to their kids about number and how much they do it. We found incredible variation from 28, you know, this is extrapolating, but between 14 and 30 months of age, it's 5 visits that are 7.5 hours of time when we were there. We extrapolated and we figured that on the low side, kids are hearing 28 number words in a week, you know, during their waking hours from their parent, primary caregiver, and at the high side, they're hearing 1,800. So that gives them a lot of, you know, the kids who are hearing a lot of this have a lot of opportunities to figure out what the number words mean, and the kids who are rarely hearing a number word have very little opportunity. So, you know, when you ask an audience, or do you think of yourself as a math person? You know, maybe it's not whether you came that way to the world, but, you know, your opportunities to start thinking about number vary incredibly at those ages. Now, this wouldn't be important if, you know, when you got to elementary school, it was easy to make up for these individual variations in knowledge. So some kids, when they arrive at elementary school, are what we call, you know, cardinal principle knowers. They know what this system is good for. They can carry out simple calculations. Other kids can say the count words, but they have no idea. When you ask them for 2 things, they can't even give you 2 things. So there's huge variation there. And the really important part of it is that variation predicts achievement in elementary school, at least through the 5th grade in math. So we know it's important to engage in this enterprise that we're starting to develop an assessment system for young kids where we can figure out how to support these skills early so that kids don't start with a deficit, you know, so that more kids are prepared for the learning that and the challenges that they'll face in elementary school. And I'll just finish with a couple of other tidbits that in addition to what we're finding for number talk and narrative talk, we're also finding huge variations in whether kids ever play with puzzles, play with blocks, the spatial language that they hear, and we're finding that those variations have big effects on the ability of kids to think spatially, to figure out, you know, if you turn something, what will it look like from the other side, even when words aren't involved. So, you know, language is a big driver of concepts and thinking, and all of these variations make a huge difference. And one other little piece to our research, which is a little different and involves a collaboration that I'm doing with Sion Bylock, just to give you a sense of what we're doing. We're looking at teachers and students in first and second grade, and we're finding that a lot of teachers have high anxiety about math. So when you ask them, how do you feel, when you have to figure out a tip on a bill in front of other people, or when you have to, solve a certain problem, and we show it to them, and then, they rate how anxious they are in these various scenarios on a scale from 1 to 5. And what we're finding, well, first of all, you probably all know that over 90% of elementary school teachers are female. And another thing you might not know is that elementary school majors are the most, have been found to be the most math anxious of all college majors. So our findings, that teachers are anxious about math, sort of corroborate that. Not all are, there's a lot of variation, but a lot are. And the important thing is that we're finding that these female teachers, their role models for their students, are affecting the learning and the stereotyping of the girls in their classes. So girls who have math anxious teachers in first and second grade are more likely to think that boys are better at math than girls. And the way we figure that out is we give them this little scenario where we say, there's a kid who's really great at math and loves to do math problems. And we don't, say any he's or she's, and we have a little story about this. We ask them to draw a picture of the kid, and the girls who draw boys for that learn less math over the school year. And also, drawing a boy, when you're told this little story about, the kid who loves math, is related to whether you have a math anxious teacher or a teacher who's very comfortable about math. So anyway, these are just some tidbits, and I wish I could have shown you the videos, but if you're really interested when we're done, I can definitely show them to you on my computer.